I'm Cherylanne Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 355 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. This is a vacation 2024 recap, otherwise known as that time that I took 5 people to 5 cities in 3 countries on 2 continents in 14 days. So welcome back, my friends, to the Brilliant Balance show. I am happy to be back behind the microphone this week after a couple of weeks traveling with my family. As you can tell from the title of this episode, that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I will admit this to you as I get ready to share this episode. I really worried a little bit that it would be self-indulgent to record a podcast episode, maybe even 2, as the case may be here, about our family vacation. And I was talking with my team about this, and I got a really important reminder from the women on my team. And here's what they were reminding me of. That really, as I was talking to them about some of the things that had happened on the trip and some of the things that, they were asking questions about and I wanted to share, it was that this episode has the opportunity to do 2 things for you as a listener. One is, hopefully, if I do my job well here, to inspire you to take a big trip with your family. Whatever the definition of big is for you, whatever maybe stretches your family in a way that you haven't done before, if I can provide the inspiration for you to do that for yourself, that will be everything to me. And the second thing is that I can help equip you to do that. That I, through what we've learned in this travel experience and several others, can maybe provide a thread of practical guidance, some ideas and tips here that will be there for you when you start planning and dreaming about and then ultimately executing a trip with your crew. So that was kind of the permission slip that I needed to share this. And I hope that you love it. So if you're not interested in hearing about our travels or hearing about what we did to make this trip possible and also what we did during the trip and some of the ways that I think really helped us make it exceptional, skip this one, right? Permission granted, but I am really excited and genuinely delighted to share with you what this experience was like with my family over the last couple of weeks. And I'm pretty freshly back. I'm back less than a week as I'm recording this. And so I think the memories are still really tender and new. They haven't really fully melted into the backdrop yet. And so I'm just going to let this surface. I have a couple of points written down that I want to make sure I share that are on the practical side of things. And then I'm going to fill this in with some stories from the trip that hopefully will put a little color commentary behind the whole thing. So, okay. Here is, again, what I said as the headline, I think is just to set the stage on this particular vacation and trip that we took. The last time that we did a really big trip as a family was in 2019. So think about where that puts us in history, right? We are 1 year pre-COVID, and we had been talking at the time about doing a trip to Europe with my kids. And we had been talking about it for years and years. And I really thought that 2020 might be the right year to do it. And as 2019 was on the horizon, there were, some reasons that we thought, oh, maybe this is the time to do it. And I was kind of going back and forth. And ultimately, my dad, sweet man, is the one who pushed me over the edge and said, look, I think you just do it. If you do it, you'll never regret that you did it. And if you wait, you never know what could happen. And boy, truer words were never spoken, because 1 year later, of course, we were in the depths of COVID, in the middle of a global pandemic, everyone in quarantine. And it would have been an impossibility. And I think it would have taken several more years before we would have even thought about venturing out of the country. So 2019, we took our young family to 3 cities. We went to Paris and Rome and London. And I called it the highlights tour of Europe because I felt like those were three places that my husband and I had already been. And so we were on really familiar territory. We knew what the key highlights and sites were. We knew our way around a little bit. In at least one of those countries, we spoke the language, and I speak enough French to be dangerous. So we were like really on solid ground. And we had an exceptional experience with the kids during that trip. So our youngest, when we took the first trip to Europe, was, let me get this right. I think she was 9. And then the other, so it was 9, 12, and 14. Maybe they were like 9, 11, and 14 at the time we traveled, but close enough. Okay. And they were old enough to remember things, but also young enough to kind of do whatever we said, right? They were along for the ride. We planned the whole thing on our own. My husband and I, we planned that trip ourselves. We booked the hotels ourselves. We figured out all the intra-country and inter-country transportation ourselves. And we had a fantastic trip. One that so many times over the last 5 years, I have said, I am so glad we did that. But this time, as we started planning to go back, the kids are 5 years older, right? We're 5 years older. And we honestly hadn't been anywhere really, really exciting since that trip. And so my husband and I both really felt like we wanted to go to places that we had also never been, right? We wanted this time for it to be a fresh experience for everyone. And so we spent some time thinking about where to go, and ultimately ended up deciding to hit 3 different countries and then 5 cities within those countries in total. And we were able to bridge 2 continents, Europe and Africa. So our 3 countries on this trip were Spain, where we went to Madrid, and then Portugal, where we went to 3 cities, Porto, Lisbon, and then this region called the Algarve, which is kind of the beach and coastal region where people, in the south of Portugal. And then we hopped on a plane across to Africa into Marrakesh, which is in Morocco. So that's where we went on this particular trip. So everyone was very excited by the time the plans started getting made. And this time we really involved the kids a lot more in choosing where we were going to go. We gave them a couple of different options and also planning what we were going to do. So I just want you to have that as backdrop that we've done this once before. That was 3 cities, and 3 countries, all within Europe, all places we'd been before. This one was a bit more of a stretch, adding, a couple more cities, a few extra days beyond the trip before. And it was the first time that my husband or I had ever been on the African continent. So it was like adding a new kind of element to our bucket list as well. Although I think we would probably need 5 trips to Africa to hit all the different experiences that we could have there across the full continent. This was certainly a very unique and singular one in Morocco. So what I want to talk about today is what are some of the principles or kind of maybe headlines of lessons that I think were important as we planned this trip that really allowed it to be one that I think we'll always remember. And I think it went very well. And then I may come back for an episode 2 and do a bit of a deeper dive into one particular thing that I think really was the secret weapon behind the entire experience. So the first thing that I think was absolutely critical to getting a trip like this done was setting expectations. Sitting down as a family several times, my husband and I with each other. And then I had some conversations individually with the kids, and we had some conversations collectively about what does it really mean to travel with 5 people for that long, right? What was important to everyone? What were the things that were kind of table stakes in the experience? And then just from our recollection of having done this before and, from the way that the kids were anticipating it, what did we maybe even think might be some of the challenges that we would face and how were we going to handle those? So I call this the 5 people, 5 experiences rule. And it really comes from my godfather, who one of the earlier times that we were traveling as a family of 5, I remember being a little nervous about it. And he is also the father of a family of 5. And he said to me, the thing you have to remember is no one is going to be having a peak experience at the same time. right? When you look across, the table at people, or, maybe you're out having an experience somewhere at a particular site, or you're on an airplane, someone is going to be having one of their best moments of the whole trip. Someone might be having one of their worst moments of the whole trip, and the other people are going to be somewhere in between. And if you can just get clear about that up front, that you are taking 5 people who are going to go have 5 unique experiences, and do not even attempt to synchronize those, you're going to come back a lot more, stable. And he was 100% right about that. When we're dealing with kids of these ages, my kids are now, one had just turned 14. I have one who's about to turn 17 and one who's 19, soon to be 20. They have such different interests. There were very different things that were going to be their favorites. There were different things that were going to be their least favorite, that they would just have to tolerate. They have different mood cycles around what makes them anxious or what calms them down, kind of what are their own highs and lows. And I think it's such an exercise in the art of compromise, of getting some of what you want, but not all of what you want, and also in turn taking, in learning as a family, like, when is it our time to get exactly what we want, and when do we need to be pleasant to everyone, even when we're not getting exactly what we want in that moment. So that was a really important thing. I think there are some very particular nuances of traveling with teens. Teenagers are, they're like in some ways mini adults. And I think that the level of autonomy that they are accustomed to having at home gets compromised when they're traveling as a crew. At least it did for ours. So for example, my kids all have their own rooms. One of them is at college, most of the year. And even when they're living in our house, they each have their own room. So they have space. We have a big house. They can go to their corners of this house and kind of get away from everybody. And when you're traveling, and we did have 2 full hotel rooms in every place that we traveled, and in some cases 2 more, apartment-like accommodations that really had a lot of space for them to spread out in, they still didn't have their own space. And they weren't in a place where they could just like take off 2 of my kids' drive, right? They weren't able to just get in a car and go drive, to have some time alone. They were off of their familiar territory around, they can't just like go to Target or go to Starbucks and, kind of be in familiar environments. And most importantly, they could not be with their friends, right? They weren't able to share this experience with some of the people that they truly and genuinely care about the most. So one of my kind of top tips around traveling with teens is we did get the international cell phone plan for the duration of our trip. It was an investment, I think it was several $100s. It wasn't like thousands of dollars, but it was, I don't know, maybe $500 to have that for everybody's phones for the duration of the trip. I think that was mission critical in keeping them connected in the evenings or in the mornings, or when we were like in a train or an airplane transfer between cities to their friends. They could get on Snapchat. They could have FaceTime conversations. They could follow what people were doing on TikTok. It was very important to them to be able to be connected using their phone and the tools that they are so accustomed to using. And that is something I 100% would do again. It also made it much easier for us, for my husband and I, to stay connected, like to my parents, just to keep up with them on what we were up to and tell them some stories. But certainly in the event that anything would have happened that needed our attention at home or with someone's health, we felt much more safe because we had that international plan and we were able to stay connected. So the fact that they were missing autonomy and time alone, some of their regulars or favorites, like foods or stores, or even like my youngest daughter was like, just could not believe that it was so difficult to get ice in a beverage anywhere we went. Like she's like, God, if we could just get some ice in our water. And that's just not typical. If you've traveled to Europe, it's just not the norm. I made the mistake. I left thinking, I have a daughter who is gluten-free and dairy-free. And I was 100, well, she's not, right? But she maintains a gluten-free, dairy-free diet. And I was just positive that we would be able to get some of our like regular protein bars and kind of favorite gluten-free, dairy-free foods for her. not so, right? It was much more difficult to find. So some of those things that they are so accustomed to having, I think, are some of the particular nuances of traveling with teens, and making some accommodations for that, I think really helped us. So that's like the first thing that I think is so important, is expectations, understanding the nuances of traveling with teens, and also like the things that we can do to make it a little more comfortable for them. Okay, balance builders, any chance you're feeling a little overwhelmed by your overloaded schedule? I know, I've been there. In fact, it's why I created 14 Days to Calendar Control. This is my step-by-step program where I share my personal system and set of tools to help you transform your chaotic weeks into easy breezy ones. Okay, maybe not easy breezy, but at least edited and organized. Listen, there's training, templates, and tools in there to help you get things under control quickly. Say goodbye to constant conflicts and chronic rushing, and say hello to calendar control. Curious? Head to brilliant-balance.com/calendar for instant access. That's brilliant-balance.com/calendar. Now back to the show. Okay, so the second piece, beyond having some conversations about expectations and figuring out how we're going to manage to them in advance or during the trip for that matter, is we really spent some time talking about priorities. The reality is it gets exciting, right? Once you start planning a trip like this, you're like, ooh, we could add this and we could add that. And there was a version of this trip where we had 2 additional cities in Spain in scope, and where we had 2 additional cities in Morocco in scope. I mean, these are big countries, right? There is lots to see. And being able to not get greedy about how many things we were going to pack into the trip, right? But really narrow down the focus so that we could do each one well was really important. Now, the definition of well is probably relative, right? Some of you might feel like, I would do one of these cities and I could spend 2 weeks. And I think that's reasonable. In our case, we sort of fell into a pacing, which I'm going to talk about next, that was really works for our family. And it required us to be clear on priorities. What were our top picks in terms of cities? And so we made the decision that Portugal was going to be the anchor, that we wanted to see these 3 very different experiences within the country of Portugal. And that because we could fly direct into Madrid, that we would be able, that's like the closest city to Portugal of the ones that we had thought about in Spain. And so we could have the chance to just do one city in Spain. And then we looked at all the options. We looked at Casablanca, we looked at Fez, we looked at Chefchaouen, like a couple of different cities in Morocco, and said, I think Marrakesh is going to be the one. And so once we had those 5 cities in scope as our priorities, it started to like snap this onto a little bit of a grid. Also, really making choices about what is the most important to you in terms of the travel budget, right? Is it the hotels, which by the way are very important to me, right? If I'm going to put money into anything on the trip, the hotels are high on my list of where I don't want to make big compromises. Food, another very big priority for me. I want at least one really good meal a day. It certainly does not have to be 5-star, but I want it to be a memorable like dinner experience that we get dressed for and have like a sit-down meal that we can talk and kind of unpack the things that happen that day. Is it going to be the activities? And I'm drawing a distinction between sightseeing, because certainly there are investments to be made in admission to certain sites or guides, which I'll talk about, but also like activities. Like one of the things we did was we went on a kayak excursion when we were in the Algarve, which is the southernmost section of Portugal that we visited. And it's the coastal region. So we did a kayak excursion with a guide where we were kayaked into these caves that are formed by the water. And it was just spectacular, right? It was one of those experiences that it was like an activity for everyone to do that was a big change of pace. In Lisbon, which is the capital of Portugal, we took a tuk-tuk tour. Some people say tuk-tuk. It's like a little electric cart, and it's covered, so you kind of sit in this like pulled cart that's electric powered. They can get through the smaller streets, has a driver, and the driver is a tour guide. And so you can quickly kind of navigate one of these cities without being inside of a vehicle, like a traditional car, or God, on a tour bus. Like it's nothing like that, but you're able to hop on and hop off. Like they'll park, pull over. We got out. We were able to take great pictures and see a lot more than we would have been able to cover on foot. So that was like a kind of combination activity or sightseeing. Also in Lisbon, we went to a fado show, which is like, fado is a traditional entertainment. Like there's singers and musicians who perform during dinner. And it's a very traditional style of music. And so we, had that as an anchor activity. So I can go on and on about this. I'll do it in some of the other elements of this episode, but we had experiences and activities in Morocco that were immersive. Like we went into a Berber village outside of the city of Marrakesh in the Atlas Mountains and had the opportunity to be in someone's home to really see the way that they cook, the way that they entertain guests, which was just so hospitable, what their living environment really is like, was just so eye-opening and so different than our own. And, to have some traditional meals in that experience of that day as well. So I think the activities and the experiences are places where they really bring to life the travel and deciding like what would the priorities be within each of the cities, what were the experiences that we wanted to have. Because honestly, I think sightseeing can get really old for younger kids especially. I think my 14-year-old hit her limit of being on like sightseeing tours. But once we were in some of these experiences, you could just see her kind of come back to life, right? It's much easier to engage, particularly at that age. Okay. So we talked about expectations and priorities. The third one I jotted down was pacing. I alluded to this earlier. We really thought a lot about how do we operate as a family? Did we want to get up early and kind of get out and start doing things? Did we want people to be able to sleep in and get a later start? Two of the countries that we were in, really all three of them skew later. There's a lot of nightlife. Meals are eaten, like in Spain, dinner is not before 8 p.m. So having dinner between 8 and 11 p.m. Is certainly not what I'm doing at home every day, but we had to make accommodations for that around what the pacing would be. Thinking about as if you were to plan a trip like this, is your family one that needs a lot of quiet time? Do you need breaks where you can kind of sit in a cafe or maybe go back and take a nap? Or do you want to go from the time you wake up until the time you go to bed? So I think the pacing starts to inform how much can you fit into a day and also how much can you fit into a city. So one thing we decided to do was to use our travel time between cities as recovery. So we probably packed a little bit more in to the time that we were in a city. And then we knew we would have like about a half a day each time between cities, just because by the time you execute the transportation and get checked into a new hotel, like that's how long it's been. Well, that was great time for organizing photos on our iPhones and getting them into the shared album and, sharing some stuff to Instagram stories or taking a nap or journaling. Like the downtime of the transitions helped us. But I think if we had fewer transitions between cities, we might have needed to build in some of that recovery. Certainly day one, I mean, if you've traveled to Europe, you know this. If you haven't, you lose a lot of the first day, really, I think, the first 24 hours, just trying to get on the same page from a jet lag standpoint. We got there, we departed midday from Cincinnati. We flew through Chicago to Madrid. And when we landed, it was like 7 a.m. Madrid time, which is 1 a.m. on our body clock. So then you think about starting your day, right, where you've really only had a few hours of sleep. We did come back and take a nap on that first day, and that allowed us to then stay up until a reasonable bedtime and kind of start to get on track by the following day. But it does take a couple days. And so I think that's another important part of pacing is making some accommodations for that on maybe day one or day two, that you'll need a little adjustment time. Also, could be delayed. A flight could get canceled or delayed. You could arrive later than expected. So not wanting to shortchange that first city, I think, is important. Okay, just a quick word about packing. I did write it down and I was like, do I want to cover this one or not? I think packing We did this both in the first trip to Europe in 2019 and then on this big trip. Everyone traveled with one rolling suitcase and one like backpack or equivalent. And that's it. We wanted to kind of be traveling pretty light, not carrying a lot of extra stuff. For our family of 5, 3 of those big bags, like roller bags, we checked, which allowed us to take some larger size items that we wouldn't have been able to get on the carry-ons. And 2 of them we kept in smaller size roller bags so that they could always stay with us. Now, chalk this up to my anxiety maybe, but I get stressed about getting separated from my luggage, right? I really want to make sure that I have a change of clothes and I have my preferred toiletries and, some things with me. So for our family of 5, we used those 2 smaller roller bags as like everybody's essentials, a couple changes of clothes and everybody's toiletries, right? And then no matter which transfer we were in throughout the trip, and remember, with 5 cities, right, we had 5 transfers, we knew we weren't going to get separated from that luggage no matter what. Even if they kept offering us opportunities to check it for free, it was like, nope, we need to keep these 2 with us. And then the larger bags allowed us to have extra things, right? We could take more things with us because we had enough space with 3 larger, bags that would not qualify as carry-on. So, your family is going to travel lighter or heavier. I also, for a 2-week trip, knew that we would need to do laundry at some point. And so I made sure that we had accommodations that had a self laundry. In this case, in the Algarve, we actually had more of an apartment style, almost like a beach condo accommodation. And so we had a washing machine on site. Now, small mishap. I thought we had a dryer. I really wasn't thinking about the European standards around dryers. And instead, what we had was one of those big drying racks, that typically I think is more for lingerie. But this was like everything we had to get dried on the drying racks on the balcony. So that was a little unexpected experience for the kids to learn what it was like to dry your laundry outside. But having access to some way to do laundry mid-trip. When we did this the last time, I actually had made sure that there was a laundry, like a place that we could take laundry. They would do it the same day and return it to us, not at the hotel, because it's just cost prohibitive to do that much laundry, to have a hotel do it for you. At least it is for me. So that was our situation around laundry. I think it is almost impossible to get through 14 days with no laundry being done. I guess it is theoretically possible, but we did elect to do laundry one time in the middle of the trip. And then the other thing I would say, kind of my last point around some of the principles that really made this work was, I would call it patience and positivity, right? So if I've had expectations, priorities, pacing, packing, and then patience and positivity. I mean, everything is not going to go well, right? It just can't. In a 14-day trip, even in a 1-week trip, right? Something is going to go wrong. Someone's going to lose their temper. They're going to have a bad mood. They're going to be tired. There's going to be a flight delay or a missed flight or a canceled flight, or some restaurant experience will be terrible. You don't know what it will be, but you can be sure that something will happen that is not ideal. And when those things happen, I think the way your family rallies around them is everything. How are we learning to manage disappointment together? How are we learning to give each other space to kind of navigate some of the ups and downs or moods? How do we use humor to get through these periods? And I think one of the things we said a lot, or we say this a lot in general, is like, this is going to be a good story one day, right? It's not always a good story while you're living it, like in the moment, sometimes not so fun, but you can almost see them coming. Like, boy, we're going to be talking about this one for a while. Remember the time that this happened. And I think that little phrase has been helpful, like a helpful reframe along the way. So there were definitely times during this trip that we needed patience and positivity. I'm going to talk about a couple of them in the part 2 of this episode, and some way more than others where we really needed patience and positivity. But I think that just going in with everybody's head wrapped around that, like something's going to go wrong. We just don't know what, right? And we're going to have to stay resilient when it does and stay together. So again, I think I hope that some of this was helpful in terms of thinking about a few practical nuances that you if you haven't done this before, might be really eye-opening. If you have, I hope you're nodding along and saying, yes, we learned that same thing, or we did that a little bit differently. There is certainly not one way to do this. Personally, the thing I've probably gotten the most questions about is really, I'm surprised that you tried to pack in 5 cities. If I said we were going to those cities, people would say, my goodness, how long are you staying? Like, it sounds like, you need a month. And I really have found that a day and a half to 2 days, which is what we had in most of these cities, was enough for us, for our family. We got to kind of hit the highlights of the things that we really wanted to see and experience. There were a few places we had a little longer than that, but in general, if you're going to do 5 cities and you have transfer time, you're going to spend 1.5 to 2 days actually in experiencing each of those cities. And my personal point of view is it was enough, right? We were able to do, if we looked through the guidebook and we talked to the people that we were consulting with and we, talked to friends who had traveled there before, I really feel like we got to do some of the things. Are there a few things we missed? Absolutely. We really wanted to go on an extended boat ride in the Douro Valley, which is accessible from Porto. Porto is the city in Portugal where they make port wine. And the valley where the vineyards are, you can take a full day boat cruise up and down that river. And it is extraordinary. From everyone who has done it has just raved about how amazing it was. And we did a very short boat trip, more in and around Porto, and we're not able to do that full experience, right? I think if you were really into kayaking, that the Algarve is an area you could have spent extended time in, right? Just like any beach location in the United States. And so for us, though, getting to have that experience and like a day or two at the beach, having a really, I called it a vacation from our vacation in the middle of all the sightseeing, was a really nice reprieve. And we didn't need that to be a longer amount of time. We had a couple of full days there, which were really fun. And we got to be in the pool and just read and unwind a bit and have it be more quiet. But I don't think we needed that to be days and days. So it really is possible to see a lot of things if you're not trying to get to every single site in every single, destination that you're traveling to. It does become a bit more of the highlights tour. So, okay, with that, I think that's plenty for today. And I want to kind of whet your appetite for doing this. In the next episode, what I want to do is give you really what was our big secret. There was this one kind of insight or idea that gelled before we went. And I think this was the secret to everything working smoothly. And I'm going to share that with you in some detail in the next episode in case you are inspired enough to start planning your own extended trip. All right, that's all for today, my friends. Till next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.